I can't hear you.
Yeah. Uh, Hi guys, welcome to the webinar on how to build a successful career in product management. Today we have Akash Sureka with us, and he'll be sharing some thoughts on what are the key tips and tricks to sort of work on to build a successful career in the field of product management. So the last time we sort of Akash has spoken about a couple of pointers on how you should
What are
start
the
your
key
career.
tips and tricks to sort of work on to build a successful career in the field of product management?
Yes.
So the last time.
And Akash is today also going to be sharing the details of sort of what are the different kind of roles a product manager works on, and what are the different sort of roles are there in a B2B versus a B2C company. So let's move this to Akash now. Akash, over to you.
Thank you, Arnav. Hi, everyone. So this is like our second part today on top of what we did last time. In the first session, we covered briefly how is the ecosystem of product management in India. Then we fairly covered what are different roles and responsibilities of a product manager, both for B2B and B2C. And then we covered, quickly some of the responsibilities and what it takes, from a daily kind of workflow standpoint in a life of product management or for a product manager. So we'll continue on that, and today we'll spend some time on how is overall product management triage or team looks like, what are the differences between product management and user experience team, what are different do's and don'ts of product management, and so on. And that will fairly cover what it takes typically to be product manager across the globe or in India. So for today's session, let me start with quickly with product management triage. And as you could see from my current slide, there is a strategic part of that and tactical part of that. Most of the times there is a confusion wherein which team does product marketing manager belongs to. Is there a difference between a kind of a technical product manager or just pure product manager, and so on. So this slides clearly kind of shows who are part of the strategic product management and who are part of tactical product management. And typically director, vice president, strategic product managers are more of strategy teams, and then product marketing managers are the real guys who are on the ground, who is more tactical and working on customer facing side. And if you could see many of the components, what does each of them briefly describes all of their tasks and responsibilities in those areas. I'll move to next slide. So this is what we also talked fairly what it takes, typically when a product manager comes to an office, and how does he really spend his time, he or she spends, his or her time, on a daily basis. So typically once, the product manager comes in the office, checks out, his or her emails, find out some backlogs, what are the feedbacks on the features, what he has rolled out, how the dev is working out, is he not happy with the kind of progress, and just kind of put up all fires around that, right? Then as I described in my previous session, what it takes to be product management, you need to have a cadence, and you need to have this daily or weekly or bi-weekly kind of a scrum, and a meetup with engineering guys to really understand how the product specs what you've rolled out is kind of moving ahead in terms of engineering. What are the issues, what are the gaps, what are new things you might want to do to make that more and more smoother, right? And then after coming from lunch, work on new features, because now you have food in your stomach, so you can actually think about some of the innovative features you might want to bring up, solve some tickets, put up new tickets, and roll it out to the teams. At the same amount of time, do more research, create some sketches around that, work with UX guys to create some wireframes, create use cases, around those, and roll out some of the KPI metrics. And then, repeat this cycle every day, to make sure that, at the end of the day, you're getting the product what you wanted, as opposed to you rolling out specs and then, after 3 months, figuring out what it, has missed out, and it's not really up to your expectations, right? So let's quickly also talk about what are different stakeholders interactions involved for a product manager. And from this slide, you actually see, product manager eventually spends, or interacts with almost everybody in the organization. But on a more, if you can distribute into two parts, I would say there is a group of, different units which he or she consistently spends time, and there are few group of units wherein it's a kind of more inconsistent or more periodic in nature. On a consistent basis, it's largely architecture, technology, and engineering groups where the product managers, interacts a lot because that's where the product specs needs to get implemented and executed. And there's lots of brainstorming sessions with architecture team and also the engineering teams. At the same point of time, while that is going on a periodic basis, the interaction with sales heads, marketing heads, the research heads, channel partners heads, customer service, customer engagements, and so on. So that is more of an I would say inconsistent but still periodic in nature to understand what are the feedbacks from the customer side, how sales is looking, to roll out those kind of product, what market research is required to be done for the new set of cycle and so on. So, just quickly summarizing on this slide, more consistent with technology, architecture, engineering guys, and then, periodically with sales, marketing, customer engagement, and customer support. So if you see this slide, it just talks about, in summarization, talks about my previous slide, wherein sales, marketing, channel development is more inconsistent, but still periodic, and technology, software process management, engineering, and architects are more continuous basis. Coming to the next kind of section in this session, very importantly, is to understand what are the differences between user experience team and product management team. Most of the times, there is a confusion in small, big, in even larger organizations, and they end up hiring, teams for purpose may not be, for which the purpose is not right. So let's quickly first see what are different job postings which gets rolled out, in this product management domain, or let's say user experience domain, right? So we'll cover this once. So the idea is to just look out at few of the job postings and map to this table which falls under PM and what falls under UX, and that kind of allows us to find out some of the differences between both of them. So this is job posting one, which says, understand and evangelize customer base and the user, community. So most of the times, this goes under product management. Develop, create or creative plans for new product initiatives. Again, most of the time, this goes under product initiatives. You should be someone who can bring in consumer experience in the user interaction design. So most of the times, this is thought as user experience requirement. Work closely with, with stakeholders across product department, VP products, and this tends to be a product management or product manager role. Analyze and prioritize new feature requests. Now this is slightly confusing whether they should go to UX, whether they should go to product manager, and so on, right? Developing product personas. This is purely UX, but we'll see, in my later slides what this actually and for whom this job profile was really described by that particular organization, right? I'm just kind of going through some of them right now. Defining product requirements, work with world-class engineers to develop and launch new products, identify use case and communicate actionable requirements to developers, user needs, understand and visualize need of inside consumer base and user community. So if you see, this was the job posting which was done for product manager by Adobe. And as I said in my, just glance through some of the slides I was going through, this was actually very fit to kind of for a role of a product manager. Develop creative plans for new product initiatives. Now, if you see the confusion over here, this was actually rolled out as an information architect position, right? As opposed to product management or even a user experience. So again, there are some confusion by a lot of organizations. How does this roles really differ, right? And we'll talk about in details about that. You should be someone who can bring consumer experience with user interaction design. So ideally, you would see, and as I described, this could have gone as a user experience profile. But if you see, even Google has posted as a product manager role, right? So again, slightly an hierarchical profile posting here. Again, work closely with stakeholders. It's very important. If you see the profile requirement says that the person should work closely with stakeholders across the product department of the company, VP of product, CEO, product experience, technical roadmap, and so on. But if we actually see, the title is described as Director of User Experience, right? And so a lot of confusion, and this was actually by Groupon. So as at the JD, it looks like it's a product manager role, but actually title says it's Director of User Experience. So clearly a confusion there. Analyze and prioritize new features. Thankfully Lulu got it right and posted as product manager profile. Developing product personas. Most of the times persona, user journey, user mapping is done by user experience team. But if you see the title over here for this job posting was actually senior manager product marketing, again a confusion. So product marketing typically does not do product personas. And if you see my previous slide of triage, product marketing guys are largely on the tactical side, working on customer feedback, customer training, customer engagement, and so on, making sure those product features are getting understood by a lot of users who are going to use their product. Again, interesting posting, product requirements focus and customer efficiency. This is again supposed to be product manager JD, but unfortunately, it was posted as user experience designer. Work with world-class engineers to develop and launch new products. Thankfully, Indeed got it right. It was termed as product manager. Identify use cases and communicate actionable requirements. Again, CityGrid got it right. Product manager. Identify and define user needs. If you see again a confusion, was rolled out as project manager. Now, well, product manager never does definition or coming out identification of user needs. Purely again a mismatch. So if you map it in this table, if you see, some of these have gone product manager and some have gone as UX, but as I described, they were not really, some of them were not really product manager, some of them were not really user experience. Clearly confusion. Now, most of the times, product manager is always considered to be on the darker side, which I always say because they have to interact with so many things goes wrong, it comes to product manager, user don't use it, comes back to product manager. And hence they are actually considered as the darker roles most of the times within the organization. But eventually, we all end up to be on darker side, right? Because engineering side, marketing side, sales side, and so on. If you don't get that cadence and a session and that brainstorming right and the execution right, then eventually we all end up on the darker side. But coming back, so what is typically a difference between product manager, and the UX? So typically that confusion plus conflict, why it actually comes up is many product managers they think that they have the skill to kind of do even user experience mapping and journey mapping. But most of the times it's not. Product managers are not real user experience experts who could bring in those kind of journey mapping and so on. And then sometimes even product managers tends to control that, wherein even if they not have that skill and even if they've not done that in past, they could, they would want to control the user experience part of that, right? But typically, how should it work? Product managers should be clearly responsible for the success of the product, right? And it includes requirements, spec, but also marketing, pricing, technical aspects, portfolio, and so on. So essentially, as you remember, in my first slide, in my first session, product managers are actually president of the product. So they're just not only catering to design the requirement, but they do a whole lot of things, as we covered in few of our previous slides. However, user experience is a very niche and a very target-oriented activity, right? What it means is it is designed to meet the user needs, and easy to use, does the advocacy of the user needs and good design within the organization, and they're actually member of the cabinet. So they're not really the presidents of the kind of that particular cabinet or the team or the product, but they're one of the members, similar to engineering or marketing or sales and so on. They become that kind of a membership. Now, this is how, if you kind of map marketing, engineering, user experience design, and so on, if you overlap all of that properly with the right cadence, with the right execution, with right brainstorming, with right interaction, with right collaboration, that's how the product success comes up, and that's what the role of product manager comes in. But typically, why does it does not work out, right? So most of the organizations, even if that is so clearly understood, it doesn't work out, because product managers often conduct research with customers and users, create a product and portfolio strategy, manage the life cycle, identify requirements, do GTM, and more strategy. But sometimes product managers are not really internally focused. They don't do research. They don't create product or portfolio strategy. They are primarily focused on short-term plans, which they should not, as per my previous slide. They create and manage specifications. Sometimes it becomes micromanagement as well. Throw all of the information to marketing. Sometimes marketing don't even understand that. Are more tactical than strategic, right? So most of the times technical product managers or strategic product managers, if you see on my triad slides previous, they should be on the strategic side, and the technical product marketing managers should be on the tactical side, right? And what does user experience should ideally do? They should understand, what they think is that they should understand business context. They should, have clarity in the roles and drive understanding of members, advocacy, user-centric process, focus on end goals, and so on. But typically, what do? Is they're not kind of really bothered about business context. They don't understand the user's roles, responsibilities, and delivery. Only focused on ideal content design process and do not acknowledge other forces at work. So they kind of sometimes tend to work in silos and focus more on deliverables. So actually, the challenge lies in middle, and this is how UX comes in. UX is kind of a gatekeeper between product management and engineering, and that's how they tend to differ. So product manager has overall view of market, sales, strategy, business context. They pass some of the information to the UX. So it's very important for UX not to work in silos, but as you could see from this overlap, they need to understand and get that knowledge transferred from product management, and then create out of that all the journeys and mappings, and then pass it to engineering. And then UX also tend to create wireframes, visual designs, and any prototypes that may be required for engineering teams to quickly develop using different set of tools. So who does what, right? So product manager finds and quantifies market problems, articulating them in the form of requirements and spec. Product architect or designer writes a functional specification describing the approach, and the product developer creates a technical specification, right? So there is a product manager, there's a UX designer, and then there's a developer, and this is how those roles actually span out across all of those three. And how can typically UX works better? Take the initiative, don't wait to be asked, make strong recommendations. So there is a whole authority to the experienced guys to make sure that they do strong recommendations on top of the specs PMs are bringing in, and help them seek to understand bigger picture. Don't divide user needs and business need. There should be one in the same, and get them out of the office to meet with users. Most of the time, UX guys don't end up going out of the office, understanding user, their behavior, their segment, and so on. But they need to really move out, similar to product managers, and then they need to work with product and asking them, how can they really move that. So if you want to be becoming a product manager, so this is how it spans out. Where do you really lie in the whole organization structure or workflow or the teams or the collaborations and so on, right? So if you see on the tactical side, if I, as I've described in my previous slides, marketing managers, product managers, software developers, and largely even the user researchers are on the tactical side, because that's where they understand and work with the users. However, the product managers are more on the strategy side, very closely work with CXOs and also all the heads to make sure the product is aligned to overall business strategy and the company strategy. So as a product manager, you get to focus on strategy, understand user needs, help ensure user focus throughout entire product lifecycle, work with marketing, sales, and other stakeholders are described, and an opportunity to work on even strategic inputs to the organization. You have to influence and coordinate with people. As I've said, PM has to have a very influencing kind of characteristic, and have to collaborate and coordinate across the people and organization units. Even mediate disputes, if might be, there could be dispute between engineering team and a marketing team, or let's say marketing and a sales team, and so on, right? So product manager has to play that role of mediator to make sure those disputes are resolved, and the product is seeing the light as per the specs been designed, and also respond to various demands. Sometimes you don't get to work on details of design, which is okay. User experience does it. You don't pass the buck. you are held responsible, and you don't have to really say it depends, right? You have to be really clear on what you're doing, because if you're not clear on all kind of assumptions, dependencies, specs, and so on, the product may not be what it should be end of the users, and the user may just throw that product out of the window. So what are do's and don'ts on the product management? Good product manager advocates for users, as I said, by understanding the challenges and issues of users, by understanding how the product can deliver the value target users, by continuously listening to the feedback and measuring them. And what you can do is you can always start with your kind of team's most creative solutions, and you can improve them with feedbacks, criticism, input from founders and leaders, ideas from anywhere, and so on. You have to also coordinate a lot of key decisions with different team members' inputs, negotiate, as I said, mediate kind of all disagreements, disputes, and so on, develop consensus between all the teams, and so on. So typically, you should act solid, support, get it operationalized, set right cadence, brainstorming, meetings, collaboration, work with legal, have an international view of your product, work with design teams. Analytics, measurement is key role of product management every stage. So keep on measuring the product behavior and the product implementation, do right communications, and bring in safety and trust. What you don't have to do is don't try to build what you think is right. It's very important that what you're building is what user thinks is right and what you think is right. Most of the times I've seen product managers do what do they think is right, but typically that ends not to a right thing end of the day. Don't expect that a team will execute orders blindly. It may not happen that whatever you roll out will be just implemented as is. You will get kickbacks from even engineering teams, architects, marketing teams, to put you down and saying what you're doing is wrong. So to make sure that you work in that kind of collaborative environment and just not expect what you do will be right. These are some of the resources which I typically suggest for product managers to go through in your journey of product management, which will be helpful to understand most of these aspects and so on, right? So typically, closing thought is a good product requires a good user experience, and a good user experience requires a close collaboration of product management design. So that's fairly what I have covered. So in an overall session, I intended to cover the product management ecosystem in India, which we did, understand different roles and responsibilities of PM, which we did, understand what it takes on a daily workflow of a product manager, which we did, then understand different do's and don'ts and interactions with various stakeholders, and what it really, and how user experience and product management really differs, right? I hope this whole session around different things of product management is helpful for you, and would be happy to take up any questions. Arnav, maybe we can start with you, and then we can open up some additional Q&As.
Yes. So, Akash, we've noticed that a lot of people, so since the product management field in itself is such an ambiguous field and not many people know about it, some of the common questions that we get from a lot of aspiring product managers is what does it take to actually transition and move into the field of product management? Is an MBA necessary to become a product manager?
So no, not really. MBA is not very necessary to be a product manager. There are many product managers and good product managers without MBA, and I'll tell you why. Wherein even in my slides, I've said that product managers have to have business context, right? But it's not necessary that business context can be learned only if you're an MBA graduate. Business context typically can also be learned by understanding that particular company you're working in, interacting with the stakeholders, seeing how the finances are working, what product revenues are coming out, how product revenues are coming, and so on. So a lot of things can also be done by being in different roles within the organization and understanding that. And definitely it's not very necessary. It's always good to have, because then in MBAs, you're taught on different organization behaviors, different organization structures, finances, accounts, legal, and so on. So that does help as a reference knowledge, but that does not become a bottleneck to be a product manager.
Right. And another common question, just adding to the previous question, is that how much knowledge of technology should a PM have in terms of? So basically, what happens is that a lot of aspiring product managers sort of don't are not well versed with technology, but still sort of want to move into the field of product management. Now, given the different kinds of PM roles that you mentioned in a company, how important would it be for a PM to sort of hands-on know the technology that goes behind the product?
I think moving forward, that is becoming more and more important. Maybe in past it was not so necessary, and I've seen sometimes even people coming from marketing departments have become product managers. But I'll tell you why. If you see largely, many enterprises are now technology driven. What it means is their businesses, their workings, their operations are all getting driven by technologies, right? Now,
Yes.
in that case, and that is not just happening within the startup industry, anyways, but also a lot of enterprises have realized that, because many of the enterprises are getting disrupted now, which we call as digital transformation most of the time, right? And
Yes.
when we talk about digital transformation, it's all driven by technologies. So if it's driven by technology, it's very important and essential most of the times for even product managers to understand various set of technology. That's one part of that why it is required. The
Yes.
second part of that is, as I've said in my interaction stakeholder interaction slides,
Yeah.
on a consistent basis, product managers tend to engage with engineers and architects, right? And engineers only understand technology. We all know they don't understand anything else in this world, right? So in that case, then it's become essential to have that kind of an engaging dialogue with those kind of teams. You have kind of a technology background. So I would say moving forward, it's becoming more and more essential, and it will become a bottleneck if you don't have it.
Yes.
And at the same point of time, it will help you to have a better engagement interaction with a lot of engineering teams and architect teams you're going to work with.
Right. Right. So another question I would sort of like to ask you, because you have such a rich experience in the field of product management, is that the Indian product management ecosystem right now is a very nascent stage. So how do you think it sort of compares to the Silicon Valley or the US? Basically, the product companies, product-driven companies over there. So how does India sort of compare to that?
Yeah, so if you have a look, in my previous slides what we covered. So yeah, I mean we are at nascent stage, but thanks to startups which are coming out, that is evolving and giving lot more flavor to it.
Yes.
But I still see because most of the startups in India are mostly oriented for Indian market, and when I say these are all large unicorns within India, right? And they have been unicorns because they've been addressing some of the real local problems of India, right?
Yes.
So in that case, you tend to become more of a kind of a localized product manager when you work with those kind of companies, as opposed to a global product manager, right? Uh,
Yes.
and and if you see some of the things which I covered in my previous slides, the offshore and some of the companies who are founded in US and large companies now there, when they start something in India, the product managers don't have those key decisive authorities, because that has been covered by, let's say, director of product management sitting out of US, right? So then
Yes.
your exposure to a global product view becomes slightly limited in either of this case, right? But having said that, Asia is one of the biggest market. Many large companies or even upcoming startups out of US, Silicon Valley are looking to expand in India, and they've expanded in India. And because they consider Asia itself or India itself as a growing market, they most of the times they want to have localized products for them, right? So we all know about Facebook Lite and similarly light versions of many other similar social networks and so on. They have been primarily designed for countries like India, right? So in
Yes.
that case, it gives us or it gives the product managers within India an opportunity to work for those kind of initiatives within even larger organizations. Yeah, so I think it's still evolving. It's still localized in flavor. The authoritative or decisiveness is still not there with the Indian product managers in case offshore. But I think as we move forward, as Indian becomes a much more mature market, as we see more and more product companies out of India targeting global territories, I think that's where we'll see largely evolvement of managers in India. And I think that's kind of we're saying around 2 to 3 years from now, or as an overall maturity levels to come to that kind of a global product management kind of a role.
Right, right. Uh, and so basically, a lot of aspiring PMs right now sort of don't know what a product management even generally look for while they're hiring a new product manager in their company. So, what are the key aspects, traits that a company looks at?
Arnab, can you come back again? Sorry, I missed that question.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, I was mentioning, so a lot of aspiring product managers sort of don't know what a product management interview entails and what companies are actually looking for. So what are the main traits that a company is looking for while they're hiring a new product manager in their company?
Yeah, I mean, there's no straight answer to that. It's combination of what we just covered in all of our slides. But I
Yeah.
think one of the very crucial trait is to keep yourself in the shoes of an end user, right?
Yes.
So how do you simulate that within yourself so that it translates to those kind of product specs? So a lot of interviews are designed around understanding user needs. What you have done similarly in your last roles. How have you interacted with various stakeholders within the organization? What kind of disputes you have gone through while interaction with the stakeholders? What kind of metrics you put in place to measure the success of the product? What kind of tools do you use to make sure the productivity is highest while you're working on product management, and so on? So some of these critical questions have to be answered,
Yes.
and if you have done it nicely, I'm sure you should be on their list.
Right. 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 And so, given your experience in the field of product management, so what are some of the common mistakes that you see young product managers making, and what would be your suggestion to them?
uh, I think one of the point which I covered was don't think what you're doing is right. So I think that's one of the mistake I would say sometimes product managers get into it, wherein what they think is the only thing which is right may not work out, right? And then eventually when user wants to use it, there's a complete 360 contradiction to that. So I think that's one of the trait, and which means is you have to be very much open in the inputs, and that inputs keep on coming from various stakeholders, including the end users as well. So I think that openness is missing as a trait, and needs to be much more wider in nature as opposed to narrow in nature. So second thing, having a cadence, or what you say is a continuous interaction. Sometimes there is no continuous interactions with engineers, developers, user experience guys, uh, and even marketing and sales guys, right? So I think that continuous engagement is very much necessary, and sometimes I see that missing in some of them. I'm saying not all, for sure, but yeah, some of them who don't do a good job there.
Right, right, right. And so you've also been a mentor to several startups. So does product management sort of vary in small companies, Series A, Series B companies versus the Googles and the Amazons of the world? So how different is product management in such companies?
I think, see, largely on the context of it, it does not. Okay, it still remains same, uh, except the agility in Series A or Series B, or largely even pre-Series A, right? So pre-Series A, Series A funded companies, there's much more agility to product managers because it's a smaller team. It's easier to interact. It's easier to set the cadences. It's easier to quickly get the feedback and roll it out, as opposed to going to cycle. The cycles are less intensive within the pre-series A or series A, and even let's say series B funded companies, as opposed to a very large organization, let's say like Google, right? But the overall context remains same. The overall portfolio remains same. The overall workflow remains same. It's just that the speed or the execution may vary between these two type of organizations.
Right, right, right. So, taking one last question up, basically, how important is domain knowledge for a PM in a company? So, I mean, would you prefer a product manager who's a generalist or someone who's a specialist in a particular domain?
No, it may vary from case to case basis, right? Based on what product you're working, right?
Yes.
But I think journalist does help sometime because then the views what you get is from different sides and different domains, as opposed to a very specific domain. And then the molding also becomes much more easier because then you don't have this baggage of a very specific domain what you come from, right? And then you may end up having a different view on the product specs you might be creating, because then you really come from a very specific domain. So and hence that openness might be slightly lesser. So, but that's my personal opinion, right? I might go for a larger, wider set of generalized product manager as opposed to a very domain specific product manager, unless my product really requires a very domain specific ask, right? But
Right.
in that case, I might even go for a specific domain expert as opposed to a domain expertise product manager, right? I can bring in the domain expertise maybe from somebody else and not really product manager. So in such cases, I might go with a combination of a separate domain expert and a generally kind of product manager, so that you get the best out of both of them.
Right. Right. Thanks, Akash. Thanks for your wonderful insights into the field of product management. I think they were really valuable. And thanks everyone for tuning into the session today. It was wonderful to have you. Do keep tuning into the series of webinars that Upgrad is organizing for you guys. Uh, we hope to have you on the Upgrad product management community as well. Thanks, Akash. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arnav. Thank you, everyone. Bye.